Hey everyone, it's Mostly Casual Commander. I'm BK, and I'm here with a special announcement. Stick around to the end of the video to learn how you could participate in our 2023 holiday giveaway. We're going to be shipping off all of this product to 4 of our lucky subscribers, so be sure to stay tuned and watch for the details. You're not going to want to miss this. Now saddle up, let's get this movable feast underway. Quick shout out to our latest patron, Nick E. Thank you so much. We're in Jurassic World Park, and I'm playing Indominus Rex Alpha. This thing cares about discarding creature cards with keywords, and that's what I'm going to do. Chris is playing Ellie and Alan, Paleontologists. This is secretly a cycling deck with big mono-value creatures. Matt is playing Blue and Owen. It's Dino Tribal. Owen's going to make Blue better, and Blue's like, yo, teamwork. And lastly, we have Scott playing Indoraptor, the perfect hybrid. He's looking to group slug us to make Indoraptor huge, and then enrage it. Simple. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and stick around for an appearance from my fat cat, Meatball. He's so chunky. I play a Misty Rainforest as my land for turn, and then pass it to Chris. I crack that Rainforest, taking 1 life. Chris plays an island into a Soul Ring into an Arcane Signet. Splendid. I cracked my Rainforest and got a Zagoth Triome. Chris passes the turn over to Matt. He draws, and then he plays a fancy Jurassic World Park forest, and then passes the turn over to Scott. He plays an Exotic Orchard as his land for turn, passing it to me. On my turn 2, I draw and play a Temple of Mystery. This allows me to scry 1, and I ship that to the bottom of my library before passing the turn back over to Chris. He draws and plays a forest, and on turn 2, he can cast his 5-drop commander, Ellie and Alan, Paleontologists. So now he's looking to fill up his bin and start discovering. On Matt's turn, he plays Hinterland Harbor, and then he says 3 visits will find him a land. In this case, it is a Cinderglade, entering the battlefield tapped because it's a forest. He passes the turn over to Scott, he draws, and then he plays a mountain as his land, and then he casts a super fancy secret lair drop, Rampant Growth. This will have him go and find a basic land in the form of a swamp. He passes the turn over to me, I play an Undergrowth Stadium, which enters the battlefield untapped because I have 2 or more opponents. Then, I cast Phyrexian Arena. Can you believe it? This thing will have me draw more cards on my upkeep that I hope to pitch to Indominus Rex. On Chris's turn, he plays a Plains, and then he Plains cycles Soaring Sandwing. He finds an irrigated farmland, putting that to hand. Now, with a high mana value creature in his graveyard, he activates his commander, so he'll exile the Sandwing, therefore discovering 6, equal to its mana value. So he'll start exiling the top of his library, and he found a Generous Ent, which is a tree folk, not a dinosaur from Jurassic World Park. He makes a food token when that entered the battlefield, and then he ships the turn over to Matt. He plays Kessig Wolfrun as his land. He then decides to cast one of his commanders, Owen Grady Raptor Trainer. Now if he gets Blue out, he could start giving it keywords, which makes his whole dinosaur team better. On Scott's turn, he plays Sulphurous Springs, which is the correct art for Sulphurous Springs, by the way. He then casts Yorlok of Scorch Thrash. This guy says Mana Burn, and Chris doesn't like that, so he channels Mirror Shell Crab, so that will counter Yarlock unless Scott can pay 3, which he can't, so Yarlock is gone. On my turn, I draw an extra card thanks to Phyrexian Arena and lose a life. Then I play Opulent Palace as my land. I follow that up with an Arcane Signet, and I follow that up by casting Lightning Greaves. This should give my commander some protection, and you can't put a price on that. Am I right? I pass the turn over to Chris. He plays an Exotic Orchard as his land for turn, and then he activates his commander, once again, exiling Mirror Shell Crab, therefore discovering 7. He sees a Galta, but sadly, Galta's got more mana value than 7. Sorry, Chris. He does find a Flourishing Fox, though. That little guy will get a +1 counter on it whenever he cycles. So he puts those other cards in the bottom of his library in a random order. He didn't offer cuts, which I found rude. Then he casts Matzalantli, the Great Door. He activates it and draws a card and discards a card. Preferably he'd discard a high mana value creature, but sadly it's a Plains. He moves to combat, swinging his Ent at Matt, dropping him to 35. He passes the turn, Matt draws, and then he casts Blue, Loyal Raptor. Clever girl. He then activates Owen, giving Blue haste, and he decides to attack me with Blue. Why? I don't know, but he did, so I go to 33. He passes the turn over to Scott, who draws and plays an Ignoble Hierarch. It's a mana dork, but more. After that, he casts Descent into Avernus. So on his upkeep, this will get some counters, and then we all get treasures, and then it deals damage equal to the counters. He passes the turn. On my upkeep, I take 1 from Phyrexian Arena, But hey, I'm drawing 2 cards per turn. I play a swamp as my land, and I'm not ready yet, so I pass the turn. On my end step, Chris channels Greater Tanuki. This will have him go and find a basic land card in the form of a Plains, entering the battlefield tapped, and then onto his turn proper, he draws, plays another Plains as his land. Afterwards, he cycles his irrigated farmland, gets a +1/+1 counter on his Fox, and then he gets to draw a card. He then activates MEATBALL, the Great Door, and he draws a card and discards a talisman. He activates his commander, exiling his Greater Tanuki, and therefore discovering, and he starts exiling the top of his library until he found a Thirst for Discovery. He'll draw 3 cards and discard 2. Unless it's a basic land. If that's the case, he'll only have to discard the basic land and not 2 cards. But sadly, he has to pitch a creature to the bin as well as a non-basic land. But that's okay, he wants creatures in there anyway. He then casts Tribute to the World Tree, so whenever a creature ETBs, either he'll get to draw a card if it's big enough, or get a +1 counter. He moved to combat, swinging at me and Scott, dealing some damage before passing to Matt. He plays a Swiftfoot Boots, and once that hits the field, he immediately equips it to blue. Following that, he activates Owen, giving blue a menace counter. Blue gets better, and then Matt decides to attack Chris with her, and he deals some combat damage, given that he has no blocks. On Scott's upkeep, Descent triggers, so each player will get 2 treasures, and then we'll take damage equal to the amount of counters on Descent, so we'll all take 2 damage, which makes his commander very attractive to cast this turn. That was all on his upkeep, so he draws for turn, and then he casts Zerta Druid. This is a mana dork, but it deals damage to each opponent whenever he uses it. He follows that up by casting Sword of Hearth and Home. He can give a thing pro-green and white, flicker one of his creatures, and get a land. That's pretty good. Afterwards, he equips it to Zerta Druid, then he passes the turn to me. I lose 1 life, thanks to Phyrexian Arena on my upkeep, draw my 2, and then I play Woodland Cemetery as my land. After that, I finally cast my commander, Indominus Rex, Alpha. So this thing enters the battlefield while I pitch some cards from my hand to my bin, and after drawing all of those cards, I only have a Bantu the Glorified and a Baleful Strix in my hand. But good news, Indominus Rex comes in with 4 counters on him in the form of Indestructible, Menace, Death Touch, and Flying. I draw 4 cards because of that. Then I go and equip my Lightning Greaves to my commander and think that maybe somebody has a response, but they don't, thankfully. I move into combat swinging at Scott, largely because I'm worried about his commander's Bloodthirst ability coming in with like a million counters next turn. So I deal 6 points of damage, and then I pass the turn over to Chris. Having drawn 4 cards, I have to discard down to hand size and put a couple of creatures into my graveyard. On to Chris's turn. He draws, and then he plays an island as his land before activating his commander once again. He will exile a creature, and then he'll start discovering. He finds an Eternal Witness in that fancy artwork. This will have him find a card from his graveyard and put it back into his hand. In addition, Eternal Witness enters the battlefield with 2 +1 counters on it, thanks to Tribute of the World Tree. After that, he casts Neoform. This will have him make a bad creature into a slightly better creature. He sacrifices his Fox, that hits his bin, and then he'll go find a 2-drop in the form of a Valiant Rescuer, and that will enter the battlefield with a +1 counter on it, thanks to Neoform, and Tribute triggers, so he'll get to draw a card as well. He got Thirst for Discovery back to his hand, thanks to Eternal Witness, so he casts that once again, drawing 3 cards and discarding 2 of them, unless it's a basic land, which this time it is. He then cycles his Krosan Tusker. This will trigger Valiant Rescuer, making him a 1/1. He got to find a forest and put it into his hand, as well as draw. Plus, his 1/1 came in with a +1 counter. He then casts Talisman of Curiosity. Then he activates MEATBALL, the Great Door, and he gets to draw a card and discard a card. He moves into combat, swinging at Matt with his Ent. Matt has no blocks. That'll have him take 5 damage, dropping to 28. Not 27, Matt, 28. There you go. Matt draws, and then he activates Owen, once again giving blue a counter. This time it's a trample counter. Then he casts Monster Manual. He can pay 2 and drop a creature from his hand onto the battlefield. He activates it using his 2 treasures, and that'll have him put a Galta Stampede Tyrant out onto the battlefield. And when Galta ETBs, it says put all the creatures from your hand out onto the battlefield too. So he gets a Scytheclaw Raptor, as well as a Regal Behemoth, When that enters the battlefield, he'll become the Monarch as well, and his lands are better lands. Then he gets Galta Primal Hunger, Galta's long-lost twin brother of the same name-ish. Then he gets an Apex Allosaur as well. Splendid. Apex Allosaur wants to box something, so that trigger will hit the stack, and Matt targets that ability at Ellie and Alan. But Chris likes his commander, so he has a response in the form of a channeled Colossal Sky Turtle. That'll have Matt's Apex Allosaur get bounced to his hand. And while Ellie and Alan are still legal targets, Apex Allosaur is no longer on the battlefield, so the ability fizzles. Matt then moves to combat, swinging his Galtas at Chris and Scott. They're hasty boys because blue has haste. Chris decides to chump block as much as possible because he's worried about his life total. He loses his Eternal Witness and his Rescuer and drops down to 26. Matt draws out his end step because he's the Monarch, and on Scott's upkeep, Descent triggers once again, so we all get 4 treasure tokens, and we each take 4 points of damage. As it stands, Indoraptor could enter the battlefield with +12/+12. He then casts Indoraptor, but he uses his Zerta Druid to pay for it, therefore pinging all of us 1 more damage. Because of that, Indoraptor enters with 15 +1/+1 counters on it, thanks to its Bloodthirst ability. He follows that up by casting Nature's Claim, and he'll target his own Descent into Avernus, therefore killing it dead, and he'll gain 4 points of life in the process, going up to 18. After that, he casts Shadow in the Warp. This will give him a little bit of creature cost reduction, and it's going to punish us every time we cast a non-creature spell the first time each turn. After that, he casts Grape Shot, whereas storm count equals 4. He targets Indoraptor 4 times, dealing 1 point of damage each time, so it's enraged 4 separate times. So for each of those triggers, Scott had to choose an opponent at random. It worked out that Matt had 2 triggers, I had 1, and Chris had 1. We all chose to sacrifice creatures for those triggers instead of taking 18. We had a minor error. Chris was meant to sacrifice a non-token creature and sacked his human. We investigated this, it doesn't appear to impact the game. On my turn, I played a swamp, and then dropped Muldrotha, the Gravetide. This allows me to start casting permanents from my graveyard, 1 of each permanent type. So my artifact is Baleful Strix, and my creature is Bantu the Glorified. When Strix ETB'd, I get to draw a card, and I'm feeling not bad now that I have a few blockers on the board. I then cast Talisman of Dominance. This triggers Shadow in the Warp. I'll update my life total in a few moments. I pass the turn over to Chris, who plays a fancy command tower as his land for turn. He then cashes in some treasures in order to cast Intruder Alarm. This will trigger Scott's Shadow in the Warp because it's Chris's first non-creature spell this turn. Afterwards, he activates his commander, exiling a creature card from his graveyard and starting to discover. He found a Monstrosity of the Lake. When that ETBs, Intruder Alarm will trigger, and all creatures will untap. It also triggered Tribute when it ETB'd, so Chris gets to draw a card. With his commander untapped again, he reactivates them and exiles another creature card, therefore discovering. He finds a Greater Sandworm. Again, when it ETBs, it triggers Intruder Alarm as well as Tribute, so he'll draw a card. In response, Scott also activates his Zerta Druid. This will ping down each one of his opponents by 1, then Intruder Alarm will resolve and untap Zerta Druid as well. Again, Chris activates his commander, exiling a creature card, and discovers. So he finds a Troyan Gutsy Explorer. In response, once again, Zerta Druid is tapped and then untapped when Intruder Alarm triggers. Chris's creature ETBs with 2 +1 counters. Chris then plane cycles Angel of the Ruins, getting a planes into his hand and getting another juicy target for Ellie and Alan, which he activates once again, exiling that angel and discovering until he found a Generous Gift. He uses that to target Indoraptor. In response, Scott activates Zerta Druid once again, because once Indoraptor dies, a 3/3 elephant is made that will untap all creatures once again. Intruder Alarm's doing work for both Chris and Scott right now. Pretty good. Chris once again activates Ellie and Alan, and he'll go Discoverin'. He exiles a bunch of cards off the top of his library until he finds a 2-drop in the form of Kiora's Follower. Again, the play pattern is that Scott will activate Zerta Druid, pinging each one of us 1. Intruder Alarm resolves, untapping it. Afterwards, Chris plays Windfall. Can you believe it? I have 7 whole cards in my hand. So we each discard our hands, and we draw back up to 7. And now that everybody has a fresh grip, Chris casts Imadi, Celebrant of Bounty. And when he casts that, he cascades. We did this a little out of sequence here, but it all worked out. Scott tapped untapped his Zerta Druid. Chris cascaded into a frantic search, so he draws 3, discards 2, and untaps 3 lands. Can you believe it? Then Emoti would resolve, triggering Intruder Alarm and Tribute, drawing him a card. Chris once again exiles something with his commander's ability, and he gets to start discovering. He found a Brainstorm off the top of his library, so he'll draw 3, put 2 cards back in any order on top of his library. He does so, and as a follow-up casts Vizier of Tumbling Sands. This will be great for untapping his commander even more than it's already untapping. When it ETBs, it triggers Intruder Alarm, so of course Scott untaps his Zerta Druid. Chris then digs deeper with his Paleontologists. Get it? By exiling something and discovering into a Fluctuator. So now his cycling abilities cost 2 less to activate. Pretty good in his secret cycling deck. He activates MEATBALL, the Great Door, drawing a card and discarding a really big mana value creature. He passes the turn to Matt, who plays Sulphur Falls. Then he activates his monster manual once again and puts out Nezahal, Primal Tide. When that ETBs, Intruder Alarm triggers, so tap untap Zerta Druid, and it untaps Chris's commander as well, before Matt cast Cresting Mosasaurus. Again triggering Intruder Alarm, so tap untap Zerta Druid, MVP. Then, Cresting Mosasaurus says bounce every creature that's not a dinosaur back to its owner's hands. So, myself, Chris, and Scott get the short end of the stick on this one, while Matt's board state is all dinosaurs. Can you believe it? It's like he planned for this when he built his deck. And, with no other creatures left standing in his way, he moves into the red zone with all of his creatures lining up against each one of us. Enough damage to knock us out of the game. Congratulations, Matt, that makes you the winner! We had some pretty impressive showings for most of these decks, save mine. Pretty good game overall, I'd say. And as promised, here's Meatball! He's so chunky! And once again, we're welcoming our newest patron, Nick E. Thank you so much for your support, it truly helps the channel grow. The support that the members of our Patreon give us helps us continue to make these videos, and it goes a long way to support our holiday giveaway for the first time ever in 2023. And speaking of holiday giveaway, let's take a look at the product and share the details about how our subscribers can win. Starting today, December 11th, 2023, and running until December 24th, Christmas Eve, 2023, you have to be a subscriber, as well as leave a comment using the terms Holiday 2023 on this video. If you're a patron, you'll be given additional chances to win each of these packages. So you'll be given 1, 2, or 3 additional chances based off of your subscription tier. Each package consists of a Lord of the Rings scene, 4 meatball stickers, which honestly is the best part, 2 commander decks, and 2 collector boosters from a variety of sets. In addition, one of the packages will contain a pack of Dragon Shield meatball sleeves. We'll be announcing the winners on a later video and Instagram post on December 31st, New Year's Eve, 2023. Quick recap. Must be a subscriber. Comment Holiday 2023 on this video. Patrons get more chances. Ships only in continental United States. Void where prohibited. Terms and conditions may apply. Meatball stickers are the best part. And happy holidays. There you have it. That's the game. What did you think of this Jurassic World Park game featuring these sweet, cool Universes Beyond commanders? Let us know in the comments. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And as always, thank you for watching.